The space station called Korath was not a kind place for anyone, but it was especially cruel to those who were small and alone and had nobody to protect them. Kale was 6 cycles old, which in human years meant he was just a little child, and he belonged to a species called the Parathians, who looked like small dragons with beautiful scales that changed colors in the light and wings that folded against their backs and eyes that glowed like embers in a dying fire. He sat on a dirty metal floor in the lower market of Korath Station, with a small cloth spread out in front of him, and on that cloth were the last things he owned in the entire universe. There was a wooden toy that his father had carved for him when he was very young, shaped like a great dragon from the old stories his people used to tell. There was a soft blanket that had the symbol of his family woven into it with threads of gold, and right in there was a small music box that played the lullabies his mother used to sing to him before everything went wrong. Kale watched as hundreds of aliens walked past him without looking down, and he tried to make himself as small as possible, because being noticed was sometimes dangerous. For someone like him, his stomach hurt from hunger, his scales had lost their shine, and his wings hung limp against his back because he did not have the energy to hold them up properly anymore. 6 months ago, his life had been completely different. 6 months ago, he had been on a transport ship with his mother and father, traveling to a new colony where his father had found work and his mother had been excited about starting fresh. 6 months ago, he had fallen asleep in his small bed, listening to his mother sing while his father flew the ship through the stars. Then the pirates came. Kale remembered the sounds more than anything else: the loud explosions and the screaming alarms, and his mother grabbing him and pushing him into a small compartment behind the wall panels and telling him to stay quiet no matter what he heard. He remembered staying in that dark space for what felt like forever, listening to terrible sounds that he did not understand and that still visited him in his nightmares. When he finally came out, his parents were gone, and the ship was being pulled toward Korath Station by a salvage crew who found him hiding and did not know what to do with a small Parathian child. The consortium had rules about orphans, and those rules were not kind. Children without guardians were supposed to be registered and sent to labor colonies, where they would work until they were old enough to take care of themselves. For Parathians, this was even worse because their scales could resist heat and their small bodies could fit into tight spaces, which made them valuable for mining operations where bigger species could not go. Kale had heard stories about those places, and he had decided he would rather starve on Korath Station than be sent to die in some dark mine on a planet without a sun. So he learned to sleep in the ventilation ducts where the security patrols could not find him, and he learned which food vendors threw away scraps at the end of each day, and he learned to be invisible because invisible children could not be caught and registered and sent away. But hiding and scavenging was not enough to survive, and slowly he'd been forced to sell everything he had. First he sold his mother's jewelry, a beautiful necklace made of crystals from their home world that she had worn every day for as long as Kale could remember. A merchant had given him enough credits for 1 week of food, and Kale had cried after the transaction because he knew his mother would have been sad to see it. Then he sold his father's data tablet, which still had family pictures stored on it and messages that his father had never finished writing that hurt even more. But his body needed food, and his ember glow was starting to fade, which meant he was getting very sick now. All he had left were these 3 things on the cloth in front of him, and he knew that selling them would mean losing the last pieces of his family forever. A shadow fell over him, and Kale looked up to see a tall alien with gray skin and 4 arms. One of the Velthari traders who ran most of the shops in the lower market. Velthari looked down at Kale's belongings with an expression that showed he was calculating their worth and finding them lacking 3 credits for everything. The Valkyrie said in a voice that made it clear this was not a negotiation chaos. Claws dug into the metal floor beneath him. 3 credits was nothing. Barely enough for 2 days of food, and these items were worth so much more than that. Not in money, but in memory and love and all the things that could not be measured. But what choice did he have? The winter cycle was coming to the station, which meant the lower levels would get cold, and the heating systems that barely worked would be turned off to save power for the upper levels, where the rich people lived without food and without warmth. Kale would not survive another month. His small hand reached toward the wooden dragon his father had carved, and he felt tears building behind his ember eyes as he prepared to say goodbye to the last piece of his old life. "Okay," he whispered, his voice breaking, but before the Valkyrie could take the items, another shadow fell across the cloth. Bigger and broader than the first, Kale looked up and saw something he had not expected. Humans were rare on Korath Station because they usually kept to their own sectors of space. And the ones who did come to places like this were usually traders or mercenaries or people running from something. This human was tall with shoulders that looked strong and hands that were covered in old scars, and eyes that seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He was looking at Kale with an expression that the little Parathian could not understand. Something soft and sad that did not match his rough appearance. "Hey," the human said, and his voice was gentle in a way that made Kale want to cry. "Are you okay, kid?" Kale did not know how to answer that question. He had not been okay for a very long time, but something about this human made him want to tell the truth instead of hiding, like he always did, and that small moment of connection would change everything. Marcus Cole had not planned to walk through the lower market that day, but his ship needed a new cooling unit, and the only place that sold them cheap was down in the parts of the station where most respectable people did not go. He was 42 years old, and he had been flying cargo ships across the Iu galaxy for more than 20 years. And in all that time, he had seen things that would make most people lose their faith in the universe, but he had also learned that sometimes the universe surprised you. His ship was called the Humble Sparrow, and it was not much to look at. Just an old freighter with patches on the hull, and an engine that made strange noises, and a heating system that only worked when it felt like it, but it was his. Paid off after 15 years of hauling freight to every corner of known space. And it was the only home he had left once. He had dreamed of a different life once. He had a wife named Sarah, and a son named Daniel, and a small house on a colony world, where the sky was always orange at sunset and the air smelled like flowers that only grew in that one place in the whole universe. Daniel had been 8 years old when the fever came to their colony, a sickness that spread fast and killed faster. And by the time the medical ships arrived, it was too late. For so many people, including the small boy who had liked to build model spaceships and who had his mother's smile and who had called Marcus Daddy every single morning. Sarah had left after that, unable to look at Marcus without seeing their son. And Marcus had understood because he could not look at himself either, so he sold the house and bought the Humble Sparrow, and he flew away from everything, thinking that if he kept moving fast enough, the grief would not be able to catch him. It did not work. The grief followed him through every jump gate and every star system and every lonely night in the cockpit, staring at the void between the stars. But Marcus kept flying because he did not know what else to do that day on Korath Station. He was walking through the lower market, trying not to look at anyone and trying not to feel anything, when he heard a voice say 3 credits for everything in a tone that made his jaw tighten. He looked over and saw a Valkyrie trader standing over a small figure on the ground. Someone so tiny that Marcus had almost walked right past without noticing. Then He saw what the small figure was a Parathian child, barely bigger than Daniel had been, with scales that should have been bright, but were dull and faded, and wings that drooped like wilted flowers, and eyes that glowed with a weak light that Marcus somehow knew should have been much stronger. Child was selling toys, not fancy toys or expensive toys, just simple things that looked handmade and loved and worn from years of being held close, and the child's hands were shaking as he reached for them, about to give away what were obviously his last precious things for 3 credits. That would not even buy him a week of food. Something inside Marcus broke, or maybe something that had been broken for 6 years, finally started to move again. He stepped forward without thinking about it, putting himself between the Velthari trader and the child. And the trader looked at him with annoyance, but also caution, because humans had a reputation in the galaxy. That reputation was not always good and not always bad, but it always included the understanding that humans were not to be pushed around easily. Go find someone else to cheat, Marcus said to the trader, and his voice came out harder than he intended. The Velthari made a sound of disgust but moved away, looking for easier prey, and Marcus turned back to the child, who was staring up at him with those ember eyes full of confusion and fear and something else that might have been hope. Marcus crouched down so he was at the same level as the little Parathian, moving slowly so he would not scare him, and he looked at the items on the cloth between Thema, carved wooden dragon, that had been made with love by someone who knew how to work with. Their hands a blanket with a family symbol that meant this child had once belonged somewhere, a music box that probably played songs from a home the child would never see again. Marcus knew what loss looked like, and he was looking at it right now. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay, kid?" The child did not answer right away, and Marcus could see him thinking, trying to decide if this human was safe or dangerous or something in between. "I am selling," the child finally said. His small voice filtered through a translate that crackled with age. "Do you want to buy?" Marcus felt his heart squeeze in his chest. This child was trying so hard to be brave, trying to survive in a place that did not care about him at all, and he was doing it the only way he knew how. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. The child hesitated, then answered, "Kale." Marcus repeated, tasting the name. "That is a good name. How old are you, Kale?" 6 cycles. 6 cycles was young. Too young to be alone on a station like this. Too young to be selling everything he owned, just to eat. "Where are your parents, Kale?" The ember glow in the child's eyes flickered, and Marcus watched as Kale's small body seemed to fold in on itself. "Gone," Kale whispered. "The pirates took them." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. Pirates. The same kind of scum that had been raiding ships and stations for as long as people had been traveling through space. The kind of monsters who killed families and left children alone, and never thought twice about it when he opened his eyes again. Kale was watching him with that same mixture of fear and hope. "I have an idea," Marcus said slowly. "How about instead of me buying your things, I buy you dinner instead?" Kale blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Why?" he asked. "Because you look hungry," Marcus said, "and because I could use some company, and because my ship has a galley full of food that I cannot eat fast enough by myself." It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough. Kale looked at his belongings, then back at Marcus, then at his belongings again, clearly fighting some internal battle that Marcus could not see. "If I go with you," Kale said quietly, "will you try to register me?" Marcus felt his stomach drop as he understood what that question meant. This child had been hiding from the authorities, living in shadows and eating scraps, because he knew what happened to orphans in consortium space. "No," Marcus said firmly. "I will not register you. I will not turn you in. I will not do anything you do not want me to do. I am just offering dinner, Kale." "That is all?" Kale studied him for a long moment with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. Then slowly, carefully, he began to gather his belongings from the cloth. "Okay," Kale said. "I will come with you." Marcus stood up and offered his hand. And after a moment of hesitation, a small clawed hand reached up and took it, and Marcus Cole, who had not felt anything but grief for 6 years, felt something warm bloom in his chest. It felt terrifyingly like hope. The cantina was small and dirty and filled with aliens of every shape and size. But it had hot food and warm drinks and tables in the back corner where nobody would bother them. Marcus led Kale to one of those tables and helped the small Parathian climb onto a chair that was too big for him. And then he ordered 2 bowls of soup and a plate of bread and watched as Kale's ember eyes went wide at the sight of real food. "Eat slowly," Marcus warned gently. "If you have not had much food lately, eating too fast will make you sick." Kale nodded and picked up his spoon with trembling claws. And he took small, careful bites, even though Marcus could tell he wanted to devour everything in front of him as fast as possible. Marcus did not eat. He just sat and watched and thought about how strange the universe was. This morning, he had woken up on his ship planning to buy engine parts and maybe drink alone at a bar somewhere and then sleep again. Now he was sitting across from a dragon child who had lost everything and who was looking at a bowl of soup like it was the most precious thing in the galaxy. "Can I ask what happened?" Marcus said softly when Kale had eaten enough to take the desperate edge off his hunger. Kale's spoon stopped moving. For a moment, Marcus thought he had pushed too hard, too fast. But then the child began to speak in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He told Marcus about the transport ship and the journey to the new colony. He told Marcus about his father, who used to carve toys and tell stories about the great dragons of old. He told Marcus about his mother, who had the most beautiful voice and who used to sing him to sleep every night. He told Marcus about the night the pirates came, the explosions and the screaming in the small compartment where his mother had hidden him, and told him to stay quiet no matter what. He told Marcus about coming out after everything was silent and finding the ship empty and cold and his parents gone forever. He told Marcus about being brought to Karth Station and realizing that nobody was going to help him and that if he wanted to survive, he would have to do it alone. He told Marcus about the labor colonies and what happened to Parathian orphans there, the mining operations and the dangerous work, and the children who went in and never came out. He told Marcus about 6 months of hiding in ventilation ducts and eating garbage and selling his memories piece by piece, just to stay alive for one more day. When he was done talking, tears were running down his small face and his ember glow was flickering like a candle in the wind. Marcus did not say anything for a long time. He just reached across the table and put his scarred hand over Kale's small clawed one, and he let the child cry without judgment or impatience. "I am sorry," Marcus finally said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. "I am so sorry that happened to you, Kale." Kale wiped his eyes with his free hand and looked up at Marcus with an expression that was part gratitude and part confusion. "Why are you being kind to me?" Kale asked. "Humans do not help other species. Everyone says so. Everyone says humans only care about their own kind." Marcus felt something twist in his chest at those words. It was true that humans had a reputation in the galaxy, a reputation for being tribal and territorial and suspicious of outsiders, and it was true that many humans lived up to that reputation every single day. But Marcus had also seen humans risk their lives for strangers and sacrifice everything for people they barely knew and loved so fiercely that it changed the course of history. Some humans are like that, Marcus admitted, but not all of us. And I would like to think I am not one of them. He paused, wondering how much to share. and then decided that this child had trusted him with his story and deserved the same honesty in return. I had a son once, Marcus said quietly. His name was Daniel, and he was about your age when he died. Cale's ember eyes widened. There was a sickness on our colony, Marcus continued, and it took him before we could do anything to stop it. And after that, my wife left, and I started flying my ship, and I have not stopped since because I did not know how to live with the emptiness. He looked at Cale and felt tears of his own building behind his eyes. Daniel would have been ashamed of me if I walked away from you tonight, Marcus said. He was kind and brave, and he loved helping people even when it was hard. And I think he would have liked you. Cale was silent for a moment, processing this information. I'm sorry about Daniel, Cale said softly. He sounds like he was a good son. He was the best, Marcus agreed. And I miss him every day. They sat together in comfortable silence while Cale finished his soup. Two broken people who had found each other by accident in a cold and uncaring universe. When the bowl was empty, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. I have a spare cabin on my ship, he said. It is small and the heating does not always work, and I am a terrible cook. But it is warm and it is safe, and nobody will find you there. Cale looked at him with hope and fear fighting for control of his face. You want me to come with you? Cale asked. I want to offer you a choice, Marcus said carefully. You can come with me tonight and sleep in a real bed and have breakfast in the morning. And then we can figure out what to do next, or I can give you some credits, and you can stay here and keep hiding. It is up to you. Cale thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I want to come with you, he said. Marcus smiled. And it was the first real smile that had crossed his face in 6 years. Then let us go home, he said. They walked together through the station toward the docking bay, where the humble sparrow was waiting. A human man and a dragon child with nothing in common except loneliness and loss, and a tiny, fragile spark of something that might become hope, and the universe, which usually did not care about such things, seemed to hold its breath as something new and precious began to grow. 3 months passed on the humble sparrow, and they were the best 3 months of Cale's life since his parents died. Marcus had turned the spare cabin into a proper room for a young Parathian, adding heat lamps that kept Cale warm, and soft blankets that did not scratch his scales, and a small shelf where Cale could display the wooden dragon and the music box and the family blanket that he had almost sold. They fell into a routine that felt like something Cale had almost forgotten existed. Something called family. Marcus would wake up early and make breakfast. And even though he was a terrible cook like he had warned, Cale did not mind because the food was made with love, and that made it taste better than anything. Then they would sit together in the cockpit while Marcus flew the ship and taught Cale about the stars, the different systems and the jump gates and the planets where humans had built colonies and the places that were still wild and unexplored. Cale learned that Marcus talked to his ship like it was alive, apologizing when he had to push the engines too hard and thanking it when they made a difficult landing. And at first Cale thought this was strange, but then he started doing it too. In the evenings they would eat dinner together, and Marcus would tell stories about his travels, the strange aliens he had met and the beautiful worlds he had seen and the adventures he had survived. And Cale would listen with his ember eyes glowing bright and ask questions that made Marcus laugh. Sometimes Cale would play his music box and teach Marcus the Parathian songs his mother used to sing. And Marcus would close his eyes and listen, and Cale could tell he was thinking about Daniel, but in a way that hurt less than it used to. Cale's scales began to change as his health improved, shifting from the dull gray of sickness and starvation to a beautiful copper color that caught the light and sparkled. And his wings grew strong enough to lift him off the ground for short flights around the cargo bay. Marcus watched this transformation with wonder and pride, and sometimes he looked at Cale with an expression that made the little Parathian's heart feel too big for his chest. the galaxy noticed two other species on stations and trading posts would stare at them when they walked together, a human and a Parathian child. And they would whisper to each other about how strange it was. Humans were supposed to be territorial and tribal, loyal only to their own species, suspicious of outsiders and unwilling to form bonds with aliens. But here was a human who had adopted a dragon child and who clearly loved him. And nobody knew what to make of it. Kale heard the whispers, and he did not care because he had something better than the galaxy's approval. He had Marcus, and he had a home, and that was enough. Then the pirates came. It happened at a fuel depot on the edge of Consortium space, a small station where ships stopped to refuel before making long jumps to distant systems. Marcus had docked the humble Sparrow and gone to the station office to arrange for fuel, leaving Kale on the ship with instructions to stay hidden. Until he came back, Kale was in his room reading a book Marcus had bought him when he heard the sound of the airlock opening and footsteps that were too heavy and too many to be Marcus. He froze, his ember glow dimming automatically as fear flooded through him. Through the thin walls of the ship he heard voices, rough and cruel, speaking a language he recognized from the worst night of his life. The pirates who had killed his parents had found him. Kale did not know how they had tracked him. Maybe they had been searching for the Parathian child they had missed 6 months ago. Maybe they had heard about the human with the dragon's son and made the connection. Maybe it was just terrible luck, but none of that mattered now. All that mattered was that they were here, and they wanted him, and there was nowhere to run. Kale squeezed himself into the smallest corner of his room and wrapped his wings around his body and tried not to make a sound, just like his mother had told him that night. Stay quiet no matter what you hear. The pirates moved through the ship, opening doors and searching compartments, and their voices got closer and closer. Then the door to Kale's room burst open, and a massive alien with scars on his face and weapons on his belt stood there grinning with too many teeth. "Found you, little dragon," the pirate said. "Your scales are going to make us very rich." Kale closed his eyes and prepared for the end. But then he heard another sound. Running footsteps and a human voice shouting with rage. Marcus had come back. He crashed into the pirate from behind, knocking him to the ground. And then he was standing in the doorway with a dented plasma pistol in his hand and fire in his eyes. "Get behind me, Kale," Marcus said. And his voice was harder than Kale had ever heard it. Kale scrambled past him into the corridor as more pirates appeared. 5 of them, all bigger than Marcus and all armed with weapons that looked much newer than his old pistol. "Stand aside, human," the leader said. "This is not your fight. We just want the Parathian." Marcus did not move. "He's not yours to take," Marcus said. "He is an orphan with no legal guardian," the pirate replied. "Which means he is salvage, just like everything else on this ship. Now move, or we will move you." Marcus raised his pistol and pointed it at the leader's head. "You will have to go through me," he said. And his voice did not shake even though he was one human against 5 pirates. "And I promise you, I do not go down easy." The fight that followed lasted 47 minutes. Marcus used every trick he had learned in 20 years of flying through dangerous space, shooting and dodging and using the ship's corridors to force the pirates to come at him one at a time. He used a fire extinguisher as a weapon when his pistol ran out of charge, swinging it like a club and filling the air with white foam that blinded his enemies, took wounds that would have stopped most people. A slash across his arm and a burn on his shoulder and a blow to the head that made blood run down his face. But he did not stop fighting because behind him was Kale, and Kale was his son now. Not by blood or by law, but by something stronger than both loved. Consortium security forces arrived just as Marcus was about to collapse. Called by the fuel depot manager who had seen the pirates board the humble Sparrow, they found 5 pirates unconscious or wounded and 1 human standing over them, barely able to stay on his feet, but still holding his empty pistol and still refusing to move away from the small Parathian child hiding behind him. "My son," Marcus said when they asked who the child was. "He is my son," and nobody argued with him. The story of the human who nearly died fighting 5 pirates to protect a Parathian orphan spread across the galaxy faster than light. Itself news networks on 12 different systems carried reports about Marcus Cole, the freight captain who had stood alone against impossible odds because he refused to let anyone take his adopted son. Biologists and sociologists and politicians all had opinions about what it meant. This human who had bonded so completely with a child of another species that he would give his life for. Him, the consortium had always classified humans as aggressively insular, a species that formed tight bonds with their own kind but rarely extended that loyalty to outsiders. But here was proof that their classification was incomplete because humans did not just fight for territory or resources or survival. They fought for family, and family to a human was not just about blood or species or genetics. Family was about choice. Family was about love. Family was about a scarred freight captain looking at a small dragon child selling toys in a dirty market and deciding that this child would not be alone anymore. Pirates who had attacked the humble Sparrow were arrested and sent to a consortium prison facility. And during the investigation, it was confirmed that they were the same crew who had raided the transport ship that killed Kale's parents 6 months earlier. Kale did not feel satisfaction when he heard this news. Just a tired kind of sadness that nothing could bring his mother and father back, but he also felt something else, something like closure, knowing that the people who had destroyed his first family were now facing justice. Marcus spent 2 weeks in a medical facility recovering from his wounds, and Kale stayed by his bedside every single day, curled up in a chair that the nurses brought for him and refusing to leave even when visiting hours were over. The medical staff learned quickly not to try separating them on the day Marcus was released. A consortium official came to see them with a proposal. Official explained that there was a process for cross-species adoption, a legal framework that had existed for centuries but was rarely used because most species did not form bonds outside their own kind. If Marcus wanted, he could formally adopt Kale and become his legal guardian, which would protect them both from anyone who might try to separate them in the future. Marcus looked at Kale with a question in his eyes, and Kale answered by throwing his arms around the human's neck and holding on as tight as he could. They signed the documents that same day 3 years later. Kale stood on the bridge of the humble Sparrow and looked out at the stars. He was 12 cycles old now, almost up to Marcus's shoulder, and his scales had shifted from copper to a brilliant gold that glowed in the light of distant suns. His wings were strong enough to carry him through the cargo bay and around the ship's corridors, and his ember glow burned bright and steady, the sign of a healthy and happy Parathian. Marcus stood beside him at the navigation console, older now with more gray in his hair, but also lighter somehow, as if the weight he had been carrying for so many years had finally started to lift. The grief would never go away completely. Kale knew, for either of them Marcus would always miss Daniel and Sarah, and the life he had lost. Kale would always miss his mother's voice and his father's hands and the home that the pirates had taken from him. But grief shared was grief halved, and the love they had built together was stronger than any pain. "Dad," Kale said, and the human word still felt special every time he used it. "Where are we going next?" Marcus smiled and ruffled the space between Kale's horns, a gesture that had become their ritual over the years. "Wherever you want, kid," Marcus said. "The galaxy is big, and we have all the time in the universe." Kale thought about it for a moment, watching the stars spin slowly outside the viewport. "Can we go somewhere warm?" he asked. Marcus laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep inside him. "Kid, you are warm," he said. "You are literally a dragon. You produce your own heat." "I know," Cale replied. And he curled his tail around Marcus's arm, the way he always did when he wanted to feel close to his father. But you are not, and I want you to be comfortable too. Marcus went quiet for a moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. You know something, Cale? He said, I spent 6 years flying through space trying to outrun my grief. Trying to find somewhere that felt less empty. Trying to fill the hole that Daniel left behind. He put his hand on Cale's head. Gentle and warm, I never found it, Marcus continued. I never found a place that felt like home. I never found anything that made the universe feel less cold and dark. He looked down at Cale with eyes that were bright with tears he was not ashamed to show. Until you, Marcus said. You are my home, Cale. You are my warmth, and I do not need to fly anywhere else to find what I was looking for, because I already have it right here. Cale felt his ember glow flare bright. Brighter than it had ever been, and he pressed himself against Marcus's side and let the warmth flow between them. I love you, Dad. Cale said, I love you too, son. Marcus replied. The humble sparrow's engines hummed to life as Marcus entered coordinates for their next destination. A colony world with orange sunsets and flowers that smelled like nothing else in the universe. A place where a human and his dragon son could walk together without anyone staring. It was not the same world where Daniel had lived and died, but it was close enough to visit the places Marcus had once called home and to share those memories with his new family outside the viewport. The stars stretched into lines as the ship jumped to light speed inside the ship. A human father and his dragon son stood side by side. Two souls who had found each other when they needed it most. Galaxy had learned something new about humans that day 3 years ago. Something that would change how other species saw them. Forever humans were not just territorial or tribal or suspicious of outsiders. Humans were protectors. Humans were family. Humans had an infinite capacity to love. And that love did not stop at the boundaries of species or blood or anything else the universe tried to put in its way. And somewhere, out there among the stars, a little dragon who had once sold his toys to survive flew through the void with a father who had given him everything: a home, a family, and warmth that would last forever.